You're listening to Talk Line with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. It's been a while, but I always enjoy having Rebbetzin Sara Shulevitz Vorhand, Esq., on the program. I'm close with her husband, Moshe Vorhand of the Vorhand Shul. Actually, he's the Praga Rav, and his congregation, Heichel Moshe. They do a lot of innovative work, and thank you, Rebbetzin, for what you do. Put together a wonderful Shabbaton with Lipa Schmelzer just about 2 weeks ago. And welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be on.
So thank you. I have you on tonight because of a case, and we're going to be discussing a broader issue, is can Orthodox Jews get justice in the criminal justice system? But there's one particular case that sparked our discussion for this evening, or this morning, I should say. So tell us about currently about somebody, an Orthodox Jew. He committed a felony, and there was a lineup. Let's start with that.
Yes. So in Florida, there was an Orthodox Jewish young man that he was charged with a felony traffic case, basically. It was a third-degree felony. And the detective treated him different from, the case was dismissed, actually, this past week. The case was treated differently than any other traffic felony that I've had because they went as far as to get an extradition warrant, have him incarcerated in Lakewood for basically a traffic case. And in the end, it was dismissed, but he had to sit, they made difficulties with him posting the bond and everything. And the detectives went out of their way to make it very difficult. They kept bringing up that he was Orthodox. He was driving a fancy car, which was a rental. Then when the discovery came in and, we already had him released and everything, pending trial, it was very odd. The lineup that he was identified by only had one Orthodox Jewish person in the photographs of the lineup. There was only one person with a yarmulke dressed as an Orthodox Jew in the lineup. So he was identified based on that because everyone knew that it was an Orthodox Jew. This would be unduly suggestive. And if it was an African-American or Hispanic, you're not supposed to have it suggestive under the Supreme Court of the United States. It has to be, fair, and that it's not just pointing to that one person. So the lineup was done unfairly. A motion to suppress the lineup was filed. The prosecution conceded to it, and the case was dismissed.
But I don't understand, how is it possible that you can have a lot? First, how many people are usually in the lineup that we're talking
So
about?
usually it has like 6. It could have, a
So you have
few
6
more.
people in the lineup. And one of them, it's an Orthodox Jew who is suspected of committing this felony.
And it said it in the police report that it was an Orthodox Jew, so it's obvious who it was because there was payas and a yarmulke on that person. No other people similar.
First of all, why is an Orthodox Jew relevant in the police write-up?
It shouldn't be, and the case became very personal because the detectives kept saying he was a privileged, wealthy Orthodox Jew because he was there for a Jewish holiday and he was driving, while he was in Florida, a rental car that was expensive. And the detective kept bringing that up, which shouldn't even be relevant. If it was a member of another minority group or religious group, that would be unacceptable.
So on the lineup, can they just pick? And I don't even see how you can pick just one person with a yarmulke. Would they ever think of putting 5 or 6 African Americans? If African American was on trial or suspected of a crime, would they put 5 whites and 1 African American? It's like singling them out. It's like, hey, this is the person. Hey, wave a flag. I'm guilty. I don't understand it.
And that's why the Supreme Court made rulings as to this, because no race or no religion should be singled out. Everyone deserves, under the Constitution, to have a fair trial, to have fair identification. It shouldn't be unduly suggestive.
I totally understood that. Now, is this an isolated case, or there are other cases like that where somebody who's Orthodox, they're going to go out of the way to make it uncomfortable or try to really single he or she out because of their religion?
So I've been contacted by many Orthodox Jews that have been singled out. And unless someone has an Orthodox Jewish lawyer, they're not sensitive to these issues. But a lot of Orthodox Jews are treated differently in the penal system when they're incarcerated or going through booking. And that's why it's important that Orthodox Jews, that there's attorneys that are Orthodox Jewish that protect, the rights of those accused. It's a basic constitutional right.
But here's the thing, though. You don't have to be Orthodox to say, hey, there's something wrong with this picture. Okay, how could you put 6 people in a lineup and only one of them is wearing a yarmulke, and it says on the report, Orthodox Jew? Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to say there's something wrong with this picture. How could you even think of doing something like that? And the fact that they did it and they got away with it, yes, the charges were dropped, but the fact that they even tried it, I think there should be, this is outrageous. I'm outraged by when I heard that.
Yes, so, it's something that is outrageous, something that's completely outrageous, and it shouldn't happen to anyone from any group. Every lineup should be fair, and every American, every person living in America, every person in the world should be entitled to fair justice when they're, facing criminal charges. It's basic human rights and due process.
I started asking you, can you, and obviously you're an expert in criminal law. That's what you do. And you represent many Orthodox Jews and others that have problems with the law. What's your feeling out there? Can somebody who's visibly Orthodox, whether it's wearing a yarmulke or a beard, payas, can they get a fair shake in the criminal justice system? Or would they be singled out because of their religion and their practices?
Yeah, I'm also a former prosecutor. So 20 years ago, when I was a prosecutor, I saw also that when there were Orthodox Jews that were arrested, since at that time it wasn't that usual, especially, maybe in certain types of cases, there are more Orthodox Jews, but in regular state court, it isn't as common, although it's becoming more common. And many times they were made examples of. And there's also cases that were in the news, federal cases, like the Rebbetzin case, or even Jonathan Pollard, where Pollard got a sentence much higher, that whatever, people feel about that case, but Jonathan Pollard got a sentence higher than spies for enemy countries. And Rebbetzin, whose case ended up being pardoned, he also got so many years for something that other people, do the same kind of, have the same kind of charges and get less amount of time.
But isn't justice supposed to be colorblind, religious blind? In other words, it has to be the same standard for each individual. Nobody should be treated differently. Everybody should be treated equally under the law. But from what it sounds like, that's not the case, that certain people are treated differently. And in the case of Orthodox Jews, I've heard there's been some problems. And by the way, which is not completely germane, but yes, germane to our conversation, I personally was offended, and we did some programming when Shelley Silver, who was incarcerated, was let out because of COVID, and there was an outcry, and he was put back in prison, and he died in prison, and they wouldn't even let him go to a regular normal hospital, which I just found outrageous. That first of all, once they let him out, they shouldn't have put him back in. They let other people out. And the standard has to be the same. If you're letting people out that are elderly, that are sick, that have conditions, then it has to be equal. You can't just say, this person I like, I'm going to keep him out. This person I don't like, I'm going to keep him incarcerated. It shouldn't work that way. But, and I've spoken to Alan Dershowitz and others, they all agree with me, but it goes on and it could happen again.
It happens all the time. And I think that us Orthodox Jews, we need to be more vocal about it. And I happen to have known Sheldon Silver because I went to Beis Yaakov of Lower East Side with his daughter. And, I have very fond memories of him and his family. And the end that he had was so horrific. And, he did time, for whatever, allegations there were. And it's unfair. And he died in a horrific, inhumane way. And it's very rare that they reverse a decision like that to let him out and then put him back in. And that, in a way, is cruel and unusual punishment. And it happens a lot, in the Orthodox Jewish community, but there's no outcry against it. And there were local cases even here where, New York is a state of where there's basically no bail laws. And Orthodox Jews, till they saw the judge, were detained longer because perhaps personal vendettas and other issues or politics were involved. And that's not fair. Everyone should be treated equally.
Are you referring to the Heshi Tishlik? I know you represent Heshi
Yeah.
Tishlik, who was arrested. He spent an extra amount of time in jail until he was released, right?
Yeah, and that was a time when there were like BLM protests. And even the BLM members that were at the courthouse that were released at the same time that Heshi was detained came over to Mindy and I and said, why isn't Heshi out? And they felt compassion for him and they were like saying, free Heshi now. So, everyone should be treated equally under the law, whatever race you are, whatever, gender, race, religion, that is part of America, that we, a basic fundamental constitutional right that everyone should be treated equally under the law.
When you say protest, can it be done through protest or should it be done by suing? And if that's the case, who would one sue? And who would be doing the suing?
So in Miami, my co-counsel, Alan Zammer, we put together a motion that, was aggressive and expressing the rights of the client as an Orthodox Jew. And it's important that, we do it through the legal system. We do it through whatever means necessary to effect justice. I'm also licensed in the Supreme Court of the United States, and it's important that these issues don't stay quiet because it's not fair.
No, it's certainly not fair. But I'm just trying to get an idea, how can we change this thing? Because it happens and it may happen more than we even know. Not every case may be reported. So the question is, though, is somebody listening to our broadcast right now.
In many cases, it would be overlooked if, you don't have an Orthodox Jewish lawyer on your case. They would just look at the lineup, just in a regular way. I was sensitive to, me and my co-counsel were sensitive to the Orthodox Jewish issues.
No, that you certainly are. You represent a lot of interesting cases in the Orthodox community, right?
Yes. In all different communities, a lot in the Orthodox community, but I've represented, football players, all kinds of people, and a lot of rabbis that were falsely accused. So, a lot of times the media doesn't portray cases the way that they are. There's also exaggeration. And especially when you're dealing with Orthodox Jews, there's a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of stereotyping. There's a lot of stereotyping, and people don't see Orthodox Jews necessarily as a minority. They're seen as white and privileged, and many people are not. And the Holocaust wasn't that long ago, and many of us are grandchildren and children of survivors, and no one should face any kind of discrimination. And it's something that should be very sensitive to us as Orthodox Jews.
No, I agree with you completely. Our guest is Rebbetzin Sara Shulevitz Vorhand, Esq. And as you heard, she is a criminal defense lawyer, former prosecutor, and she was speaking out against what she sees in her practice and from her experience about discrimination against Orthodox Jews in the criminal justice system. The case that sparked it off is a story of an Orthodox Jewish man extradited from Lakewood for a traffic violation and put in a lineup with 6 people. He's the only one wearing yarmulke, and of course they picked him out because the paper said that it was an Orthodox Jew who did the crime. But this is just not an isolated case. Unfortunately, it is the norm, not the norm, but it happens a lot more than we acknowledge. We're going to continue our conversation right after these messages. Okay, that's our.
You're listening to Talk Line with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. Our guest is Rebbetzin Sara Shulevitz Vorhand, Esq. She is a Rebbetzin in the very popular a Shul, which is the congregation Heichel Moshe in Manhattan under the auspices of the Praga Rebbe Moshe Vorhand Shlita, but she's also a very well-known criminal defense attorney as well as a former prosecutor, and looking at the criminal justice system and how it relates to Orthodox Jews. So, Rebbetzin, we looked at some cases of where you have personally been involved with where there was an injustice if somebody was Orthodox that came across prosecution. What are some of the other cases that you come across?
So in terms of Orthodox Jews, there's been cases that I've represented rabbis. There's been cases also with financial cases. And always like the beginning of the media will be like, it was an Orthodox Jew that was charged. And, you know, a lot of times Orthodox Jews are singled out, you know, but this situation with the lineup was something that it was just so clear. And these things happen so often. And I get phone calls almost daily about, you know, other Orthodox Jews that were treated unfairly.
For example, what are some of the other cases that?
So I had cases also. I'm licensed in federal and various jurisdictions. In the Midwest, I had a client that was a frum young guy that was charged with basically being a drug mule with trafficking. And first of all, he hasn't even been to Israel in years. He didn't have an Israeli passport. And the federal court in the Midwest wouldn't release him on a bond, which he was entitled to. I had to fight for him to get it because they said that he's inherently, by being an Orthodox Jew, a flight risk back to Israel.
Well, it happened in the Rebbetzin case because they said that they also there was say be a flight risk to Israel. There have been other cases. There was a case in New York of a fraud case, the Platinum Fund, where they said that being an Orthodox Jew and there'd be a flight risk to Israel. So you hear that in cases where some Orthodox Jew where they say it'd be a flight risk to Israel, which by the way has an extradition treaty with the United States anyway. So
yes,
I'm not even sure what that means.
Yeah, and there's other clients I have from different countries, from South America, from Europe, from other parts, that's never brought up in court. And their countries don't even have that extradition agreement. So it's really an unfair argument. And it's used very often in federal court to detain a defendant that's Orthodox Jewish, who may not have even been to Israel recently, have ties to Israel. They just inherently consider them a flight risk.
Did you have any success in having that overturned?
So this young man is free now. He has a second leash on life, but he stayed in pending trial longer than someone else would have, you know, and it was very difficult because it was in a jurisdiction in, you know, the Midwest where they weren't familiar with Orthodox Jews, getting him kosher food. I worked with the Aleph Institute that helped him to, you know, have kosher food and have to fill in, but it was a difficult situation.
I could imagine. Is that the number one issue when Orthodox Jews are charged and they have to be incarcerated and putting a bond where they're going to say they're flight risk to Israel? I'm sure there are other issues.
Sometimes there's mockery about wearing tefillin or getting kosher meals or having a yarmulke. And sometimes even correction officers will like joke around like, oh, they're religious all of a sudden, and they didn't care when they committed this crime. Everyone in America is presumed innocent. And you don't see that with other groups as much.
Now, as far as kosher food is concerned, if somebody became observant in prison, aren't they entitled to get kosher food?
Yes. And sometimes even I've seen cases where people, you know,
we're not Jewish.
Religious, yeah, or my non-Jewish clients are like, how could I get kosher food? Some of them are like, I'm ready to convert. But yeah,
better in prison. I'm not sure, but I guess they perceive it to be.
Yes, they perceive it to be better. The food in prison is not good either way, but there are organizations like Aleph that help to make it better for people. And you know, it's a very sad situation because, you know, it's a horrible situation to be, God forbid, incarcerated, chas v'shalom. And, you know, every day we make a bracha in Shemona Esrei, and in the brachos, Matir Asurim, that Hashem releases the imprisoned. And it's something that, there are organizations that are helping with that, but it's a disenfranchised group that, other people judge, even in our own community, and no one should really judge anyone, because having been a criminal lawyer for 20 years, I see that there's always more to the story. And there's, according to Jewish court halacha, according to Beis Din, it was very hard to convict someone. You needed 2 aides, you needed witnesses that actually saw the incident. They needed to be warned before. There needed to be asra. Circumstantial evidence wasn't enough to convict in a Jewish court. And, we have to, give people the benefit of the doubt, unless it's like a extremely violent and dangerous crime. And even so, we have to know all the evidence.
No question about that. Is it, from what I recall, by the way, when it comes to kosher food in New York, if somebody says that I use only satmar shchita or lababa shchita, for example, that they have to be accommodated in prison with that?
Yeah, they are supposed to be. There have been like even newspaper articles about it. But in Florida, generally, there's like, it's just regular kosher, with, glatt kosher, and the Aleph Institute helps to provide that, which they do wonderful work.
So in other words, in New York, somebody can get either Lubavitch or satmar shchita, but in Florida, that's not the case. They just get the standard glatt kosher.
Yes, but now that there's a bigger influx of Orthodox Jews moving to the South Florida area, there might be more awareness as to that, and there might be more, changes to that. It's just that New York has such a large Jewish population, but now a lot of that population is moving to South Florida.
Now, tell me the federal rule or law, or even the state law. If somebody wants kosher, but they want to be stricter kosher, for example, does the state or the federal government have to accommodate them legally? I'm not talking about New York. I'm talking about, let's say, even Florida. It's not. Are they required to do so by statute?
I'm not sure about that, but I do think that, like organizations like Aleph, they have a good connection with the feds, and they try to accommodate as much as possible Lubavitch, Satmar, everyone that's incarcerated that's Jewish.
No, because these are issues I'm sure they're going to come up more and more. What are some of the more interesting cases that you've encountered in your practice, especially vis-a-vis the Orthodox community?
I've seen so many, every type of case, everything, like so many different types of cases, but sometimes like Orthodox Jews are misunderstood. Sometimes Orthodox Jews are susceptible to being set up or entrapped because they could be naive. They live in a smaller society that's a little bit sometimes more innocent, sometimes not, but there are a lot of,
right.
What do you say?
More insular, more innocent.
More insular, yes, right. Yes.
But give us an example of entrapment.
So I had a case in Florida where a Hasidic man it was an undercover female cop that said that he was trying to solicit a prostitute. And it's just, I don't even know if he knew what was going on. The guy barely spoke English. And sometimes they look for people to set up. And he seemed very confused. And the case got dismissed for entrapment. But, sometimes people are at the wrong place at the wrong time, but all different kinds of cases.
When you say entrapment, is it, from what I've read, and you would know better than I, that entrapment doesn't always work, or most of the time doesn't work as an excuse when you go up against, the system? Right.
So entrapment, you have to show that the person wasn't predisposed to do this unless they were, entrapped. Sometimes, undercover or confidential informants, they're working off their confidential informants specifically are working, especially in the federal system, they're working off their own sentence by snitching on people or setting other people up. So, these things happen, that sometimes innocent people get ensnared, or someone that's not that guilty gets set up because the person is desperate to get out of their own sentence.
So in other words, so for example, if they know they suspect a politician is being crooked, then they set up a system or an entrapment to catch them doing what he's supposedly allegedly doing. It's different than if they're just taking somebody out of the ordinary and try to entrap them. And like in the case of the Hasidic man who they try to have a woman police officer try to engage him in prostitution. So somebody who they've never seen this person before. They're just trying to ensnare somebody off the street, so to speak.
Right, it could happen, there are cases like that. And, sometimes Orthodox Jews could be naive and they don't come from the world where they watch TV, where they watch movies. He didn't even understand that he was charged with prostitution. He kept saying he thought that he was charged with being a thief. He said nishtagana, whatever. He wasn't understanding what was going on.
So you had to explain it to him, but
Yes.
that seemed to have worked in his particular case.
It did, yes.
Our guest for a little while longer is Rebbetzin Sara Shulevitz Vorhand, Esq. She is a criminal defense attorney, also a Rebbetzin in Manhattan, and the very popular congregation Heichel Moshe, which is the home of the Praga Reverend Moshe Vorhand Shlita, a wonderful shul on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. If you haven't been there, you should make it your business to attend. And they have a lot of Shabbatonim. They just had one with Lipa Schmeltz, very popular. A lot of singles came to that weekend too. A very, very good and well done Shabbaton. Thanks to our guests as well. We're going to be right back. Don't go away.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
We're back. Our final stretch with Rebbetzin Sara Shulevitz Vorhand, Esquire, criminal defense lawyer in Florida, also former prosecutor. And let's go to Heshi in Queens. Heshi, you have a question or comment? Go ahead, Heshi in Queens.
Yes. First of all, Rebbetzin and lawyer, thank you so much for what you do. I'm sure you're helping many Jews and a tremendous mitzvah, physical mitzvahs.
Thank you. Amen. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I wanted to bring to the attention to people something that happened that I was a witness to. I was in Chicago. I was in the jewelry business 34 years ago. And I knew a guy, a Persian gentleman I was doing business with, spoke English. But I knew that same day, his brother had come in. He didn't need to speak English, came in from Iran. And I come downstairs to the elevator, and I see the police and this brother, I knew who he was, that couldn't speak English. And the police was there with handcuffs on this Jewish Persian young man that couldn't even speak English. And this woman that was young woman dressed extraordinarily provocatively, and she was claiming that in the elevator they were together, that he assaulted her at the elevator. And he didn't even understand what's going on. But I picked up, I asked the officer what's going on and so on. I was there on business, jewelry business. And then I realized that there is about 10 minutes later, it hit me. I was trying to help, and I realized that there was a camera in the elevator. And I saved the guy's life. And it turned out that, when you look at the video, it's like it says Abraham and Sarah, right? She says, Zuba, Zubi is Zoo, Zuba, Zubi is Zoo. He was in one corner, over there, they were dabbling to have a child, the other way. But over here, it's like he was in one corner, she was in the other. The whole story never happened, just
Wow.
And this woman did it several times, and then she takes 30, 40,000, whatever she can get to get off the hook. You want to give it $30,000. She pulled it twice before.
Have you seen Rebbetzin? Have you seen these kinds of cases?
Yes. So actually, I had a case like this in Florida, in Miami, with a football player where he was falsely accused of intoxicating. The media had him convicted already, and he ended up doing no jail time, and his case was ultimately dismissed. He was accused of raping a girl, intoxicating her. So the surveillance video, like what this caller very rightfully said, my investigator got all the, because the news only showed like bits and pieces of the surveillance, but the full surveillance showed that she was intoxicating herself. she was jumping on him, she was grabbing him. And then my investigator found out the restaurant where they went to after the alleged incident. And there was a receipt, they went for steak, they were laughing together. And she was upset because he had a girlfriend and she wanted to be his girlfriend, and she was upset. And, she was extorting him for money. And I was ultimately able to clear his name. I had another case like that where an exotic dancer falsely accused someone, and it was because she basically emptied out the account of her fiance, and he was going to call the police on her, and she accused him of rape. And even though it was consensual, with the rape kit, his DNA showed up. So, and I got his case no actions. I got it dismissed. Also, that was a Miami case. So this happens many times, that there are false allegations and it destroys people's names and reputations. And you need a defense attorney that really fights and, is really there for you, because society sometimes believes that if someone's accused or if they're handcuffed, that they're guilty, and they're not necessarily.
Actually, thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly, it's we live in interest. And by the way, and I mentioned this to Alan Dershowitz and to Nat Lewin as well. It seems to me that today, if somebody has a criminal conviction, that it usually pays for them to, I think 90% of the cases, some crazy number like that, are settled by a plea deal as opposed to actually going to trial, even though someone may not be guilty, but it's easier, more efficient, more cost benefits there. Then also they threaten you that if you don't take the plea deal, you can get a much harsher sentence than if you accept it, right? Do you find that?
Yes, it's called a plea of convenience. And sometimes people plead no contest, which is construed as basically guilty, where they're not admitting, not denying, but sometimes people don't have the resources to fight a case, or there's just too much risk, because if they're convicted, they could go to jail for many years and they'll lose their life. So many people plead that are not guilty.
Wow, which is a shame, because it's not the way the system is supposed to be. But unfortunately, that's the way it is. So before I let you go, just tell us about you had some unusual cases dealing with the Orthodox community. You mentioned one case before. What are some of the more interesting, colorful ones that you've encountered during your career?
So many.
When's the book coming out?
I know, that's a good question. Even cases. There's been cases even of fights in shuls. I had a case where someone stabbed another man and they thought it was a terrorist attack, but it was a mentally ill man. He was hallucinating and he stabbed someone in the middle of shul during Kedusha.
Wow.
And then another case a few years ago where someone stabbed someone in shul in the middle of Ne'ilah. All different kinds of situations. Also, a lot of times criminal cases come from mental illness. People are not given the proper medications. They don't necessarily have criminal intent. I had a case where someone stabbed someone in the middle of a Shabbos dinner in Miami. There's so many different cases, but there are unfortunately also in our community mentally ill people like any other community. And, people do need treatment and there needs to be sensitivity. These situations, in the past have been swept under the rug, but I think we live in a time where there's more open dialogue about these issues.
Did you get those people who were accused of stabbing in shul? Did you get them off?
Yes. So one of them had to get mental health treatment. One of them, the victim didn't want to proceed because he had Rahmanas and he knew that the guy was mentally ill and he didn't want to prosecute. And even though he was injured, but his injuries were temporary. But there's so many cases, so many.
You also wear the hat of a shadchan matchmaker, which I know as well. So
that's harder than being a criminal lawyer.
It is harder, right? It's
yes. Yeah.
So tell us about that.
So our shul, the Rabbi Vorhand Shtibel, has the most diverse group of Jews. Like seriously, We have people from New Square, we have people from Satmar, Breslov, Lubavitch, non-religious, religious, modern Orthodox. We have every single type of Jew, seriously. So, and we have a lot of diversity in the synagogue. So I deal with matches for all different kinds of people, and it's difficult. And sometimes being a matchmaker could be more difficult than being a lawyer, because my father was saying, like, you only make enemies, you get blamed for everything, and like you're trying to do a mitzvah, but a lot of times it's not even appreciated. Like when you get someone out of jail, they appreciate you, more, they appreciate you. I've had people, like, I could be in a kosher restaurant in Florida and someone will come over and be like, you saved my life. But like with matchmaking, it's very, very hard to be on target. And trying, Debbie Susan from the Shul, we work together as matchmakers to try to set people up. And we do it as a mitzvah, but it's very difficult.
But nevertheless, you still persevere, and you're going full steam ahead.
Yeah, we are. We don't give up. And we had such a wonderful Shabbaton to Shabbosim ago, the other Shabbos with Lipa Schmelzer. And there were so many different types of Jews, and everyone got along. And we had speed dating, and everything was done modestly and in a tznius way. And it was just wonderful. And I've stayed in touch with the people. Some people met people at the event and are going out still. So hoping that we'll hear some simchas soon.
Well, I hope you get more matches than clients from these Shabbos.
So far, I have more clients, many more. Many more.
I'm talking from the Shabbatons or from the people that walk through. But
yeah, and I have another funny situation that sometimes, like, I have Israeli clients, and I'm using like biblical Torah Hebrew to translate, and I confuse the word jail for Yosef HaTzadik being in a bore in a pit, and I confused the chashim, the snakes, for handcuffs. So I've had a lot of dramas with my Torah Hebrew, and have a lot of Israeli clients also. But Baruch Hashem, it's worked out, and a lot of people were exonerated, acquitted, or freed, and I love doing that work. And also because the case of Yosef HaTzadik, he was also falsely accused and sat in prison for many years for something that he didn't do, and ultimately he ended up becoming the viceroy of Egypt. And Hashem lifts people up, so I love giving people a second chance.
As Jesse Jackson used to say, from the outhouse to the White House.
Exactly. There's, Gal Choser Ba'olam, one day someone's up, someone's down. So it's wonderful to be able to, I hear stories. One of my African-American clients, they contacted me that they became a city, they had issues as a juvenile, and I helped them out of it, and they changed her life, and they're a city commissioner. And, I'm so happy when I hear stories like that from all walks of life. I have clients.
I want to thank you, Rebbetzin Sara Shulevitz Vorhand, Esq., for being here with us, former prosecutor, criminal defense lawyer, Rebbetzin matchmaker. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me on, and it's always a pleasure, and best regards to your Rebbetzin.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and you heard Rebbetzin Sara Shulevitz Vorhand, Esq. here on the Talkline.